suspects are here. Can we begin?
Sure can.
All right, then let's kick off our November Operations Committee meeting. Let's start with getting the minutes from last meeting approved. And if everyone has had a chance to look at them, I would take a motion.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Second? Marco?
I'll second it. Sorry, I'm trying to get my computer to work, so I needed to look up my password. I wasn't just checking my phone, I promise.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, great. So then that takes us to our climate action plan, and I have to say I'm actually really excited to hear from the team on this. I feel like we were hot and heavy with climate action like maybe 15 months ago, and then we kind of haven't had an update for a while. So I'm excited to hear where we are, and I'll turn it over to the team.
Sure, well, thank you. Unless Matt has other words, I think you kind of summed up where we are. It's been a while, and so we wanted to bring this back to the board as we talked about as part of FMP 2.0 and part of our overall approach over the next decade, and really just into the future in general. And so Ben, I'm going to let him start, and then he'll introduce our guest, Dwight, to talk as well. If you remember, Dwight came on before we presented to the board a couple of years ago about some of the work that we're doing. It's been a great partner with us in this. So I think excitement is due for what we're going to talk about tonight and where we see this going over the next several years. Okay?
Yeah, so I'm not going to go too much into the history because Dwight's going to cover that, but a few years back we got you and I involved. I think it's a CEE to kind of evaluate greenhouse gas emissions within the school district and kind of get a benchmark of where we're at. From there, Jeff and I worked with Dwayne and hired on design engineers to take a more advanced look at it and kind of give us a roadmap of kind of those important measures going forward, be able to project out with all the construction going on, past and present, what those greenhouse emissions are. So Dwight is the, I don't know what your title technically is.
Yeah.
What's that? Principal.
Not a school
Yeah,
principal.
so from design engineers, and he has a team that works underneath him to kind of delve into everything in more detail. But his stuff is way more interesting than I can say, so I'll turn it over to him unless Jeff has something to
It's
say.
spelled different than the principal at a school.
Is he? All right.
I think I need to go up there to be able to click through the slides, right? Unless you have a remote clicker.
I don't know if there's one back there or not.
This will work. Feels a little formal.
Oh,
But.
sorry.
So thanks for the opportunity to work on this. It's been fun, and I feel like I've learned a lot too going through this stuff. So just quickly, I wanted to cover basically 3 topics, kind of like Ben was talking about. A quick overview of the history of climate action in the Iowa City School District and what's happened with that. And we'll talk through in a little more detail what the actual emissions have been since that first resolution was adopted. So 2018 through 2021, we have actual data that we can go over and see what the projections were, what the trends are, and then talk about, okay, from here on out, what are the projections based on our current path, and what does that tell us about what you might want to consider for future additional plans beyond what's already in place. So in 2019, the board adopted the resolution to do an initial inventory and establish targets. There was a question earlier, IPCC is referenced here. That's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, so the international body that really sets the standards for that. And so what the board said is that should hire you and I to help establish what those targets should be in alignment with the IPCC. So in 2020 then, they did their initial inventory. There's a lag between when they do the data gathering because you have to wait until essentially the utilities publish their emissions data for that year. So in 2020, they did, 2018 was the most recent data that was available. So they did that. And the IPCC target was 45% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. Their baseline was, I think, 2010, I'm not 100% sure, but there wasn't data that was available, so based on 2018 data, that's what formed the baseline for the 45% reduction by 2030 from the 2018 baseline. And then net zero by 2050. And so those goals are in alignment with the IPCC, which is a good place to be. So then in 2021, that's when we came on board to help provide a little more detail to that analysis and help think about what that means for your plans. So we did an updated inventory with 2019 data. And then we also did more detailed projections through 2030 in particular, since that really is kind of the time frame that you guys are dealing with in terms of your facility plans right now. And so we did that projection through 2030 that included Facilities Master Plan 1 projects and what impact those would have on that. And then also helped, I think, establish some of the strategies that have been gone into Facilities Master Plan 2. Based on the trends and things that we were seeing then. So that brings us to today, where in 2022, we're going to give you an update on, we can do both 2020 and 2021 data now, so we'll have 4 years of data to look at. And then we'll update the projections through 2030 with the Facility Master Plan 2 strategies that are in place. And then at the end, we can kind of talk about, okay, so this is what where we're headed with the strategies that you guys already are planning to do. What other things might you want to think about doing between now and 2030? Are there other things that you want to, strategies that you want to add in? So greenhouse gas emissions is measured in metric tons of CO2, and this is on an annual basis. So in 2018, it's just over 17,000 metric tons of CO2. It's just a number. It doesn't really mean, I mean, it means something, but we don't have a real intuitive sense of what that means. But it gives us a good baseline to start. So based on that, the target of 45% reduction was established. So that's the purple line there. And then in 2021, we updated it with the actual data for 2019, which was down quite a bit from 2018. And then we did projections through 2030, but only what's shown here is 2020 and 2021, based on plans that both the district had for going ahead, and then also what are your utility providers planning to do. So now we can put in the actuals for 2020 and 2021, and you can see, I mean, the good news is you guys met your 2030 target 9 years ahead of schedule. So in 2021, met that 45% reduction, which is pretty incredible, actually. I don't know that there's many people that had reasonable or reasonably aggressive targets for greenhouse gas emissions that can say they've met their goals 9 years ahead of schedule. So take a moment to celebrate that. One thing that's interesting here is you can see kind of the COVID dip. So 2020 is dropped down and then kind of went back up in 2021, and that really is primarily COVID related.
So, how is it related?
How is it related? Well, you just had less, we can kind of see it here actually when we dive into these next slides. You had, less intense operations all around with your buildings, your transportation, everything was reduced. And so,
Okay.
so that's the biggest effect. Yep.
So why did it still exceed the projected?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I have a thought on that I'll get to here in a minute because I think it'll be easier to bring up. So I think it's worth diving into the details of not just the top line number of what the total greenhouse gases were for each of those years, but where did those come from? How does it break down by fuel type or sector or whatever you want to call that? So that's what this graph is. The top three are what we call scope 1 or direct emissions. So this is greenhouse gas emissions that result from the district burning fossil fuels and emitting greenhouse gases directly into the atmosphere directly from your activities. So that's called scope 1 emissions. So that would be your gasoline, diesel, and natural gas, your fossil fuel use. Scope 2 emissions, sometimes called indirect emissions. That is emissions related to your energy that you purchase. So there's greenhouse gas emissions associated when electricity is generated. So you use a certain amount of electricity, and then when we go to your utility providers and we see, okay, how much greenhouse gases did you emit when you produced the electricity that you sold to us? And so that's generally counted as part of your emissions. This analysis does not include scope 3 emissions. So scope 3 emissions would be things like people who drive to school, the teachers and students that drive to school, the emissions associated with that. So that's another whole level, really not part of this analysis.
Could we just pause for 1 second? So are the diesel emissions from our buses?
Yes.
What are the gasoline emissions then?
My staff, mainly.
Oh, okay.
And the B vans or the small vans that drive around.
Okay, so still vehicles,
Yeah.
but our
Right
smaller gasoline.
Student
One of our
special ed
network guys,
vans, athletic
he's
vans.
coming down
Okay.
now. should
And
be
then
like
the
15
natural
years old.
gas is heating the buildings,
Kitchen appliances.
kitchen appliances, things like that.
It just occurred to me why that went up, but I'll keep my mouth shut.
That would be a
It
first.
has the same first name that I have. It's because of Dwayne, but I'll let him explain it.
Dwayne Arnold?
So we didn't really dive into diesel and gasoline usage that much. We could talk about it, but in terms of analyzing, there weren't really any big changes to your fleet during that time period. So was going to focus on really the building side of things because your emissions are really 80 to 90% of your emissions are associated with the building. So that's kind of the big picture anyway. So I thought we would spend our time on that. So natural gas emissions reduced by 35% during this 4-year time period. And that's a pretty amazing result. It really results from the Facility Master Plan 1 projects because those included a number of projects where you converted natural gas heat to geothermal heat pumps. And so that directly reduced your fossil fuel usage, a 35% reduction over the entire district in 4 years. Pretty amazing. So the next three are all electricity numbers, and there's 3 different lines for your electricity use because you have 3 different utility providers, and those utility providers have very different emissions profiles. So the first one on here is the Linn County REC. Linn County REC emissions increased by 235%, so they increased a lot. And the reason is because of Dwayne Arnold nuclear plant being retired. So that was about a third of their electricity was carbon free with nuclear energy, and that went away. And it kind of is split on here between 2020 and 2021 because it was about halfway through, really right after the derecho is when that plant stopped operation. So partway through 2020 it stopped operation, and then 2021 was the year when they had no nuclear energy at all. So that's we're going to talk more about Linn County REC because as you'll see when we look at the projections, it becomes a bigger and bigger chunk of your emissions. So that's really a place to focus, and we'll talk in more detail about that later. Alliant Energy reduced by 22%. Alliant Energy is increasing their renewable portfolio, not as quickly as Mid-American, but they are increasing it. And so that did result in reduced emissions from 2018 to 2021. And that 22% and the previous percentages are all relation between 2021 and 2018. The Mid-American, and this is a big result here. In those 3 years from 2018, or 4 years from 2018 to 2021, your Mid-American buildings reduced emissions by 88%, and that's really just a direct result of them dramatically increasing their renewable electricity for Iowans.
Just so you know, we have 2 schools with Alliant, and I believe 4 schools with Lynn County. Everything else is Mid-American.
So the vast majority of your buildings are Mid-American. Now, one point of interest on that is Mid-American does have coal plants in Iowa, and so there's sometimes some discussion about, well, what's happening with that power, and their generation mix as a whole of everything they generate in Iowa is not the 85% that they claim for what they're selling you. And it's reasonable to be skeptical of that, but my opinion is that is legit because Mid-American, I don't know how far you want to go into this, but it probably is worth doing because it'll relate to Lynn County REC in a little bit. There's renewable energy credits is the method for tracking where the renewable energy goes. You generate, you have a wind turbine and it's putting power into the grid. Well, you can't track where those electrons go. You have a certain amount of renewable energy that went in the grid. Who gets to claim it? Who gets to use it? That's what renewable energy credits are for. It's an accounting system to say, okay, I'm going to sell the renewable electricity to you and not to you. And the way Mid-American does that is they reserve all of the renewable energy credits associated with all of their Iowa-based wind generation for their Iowa customers. And so that's how they can make what I consider to be a legitimate claim that 88% of the electricity that you buy from them in Iowa comes from renewable sources. And that's because they've reserved those credits for you. They haven't sold them to a third party. Lynn County REC actually, as a contrast, does sell their renewable credits to other people. So when you buy electricity from Lynn County REC, yes, their partner SIPCO that has some renewable generation, wind and now more solar, but they're selling that renewable energy, that renewable electricity to other customers and buying cheaper wholesale power, which is power that you're buying from them. And we'll talk more about that later. It's a complicated, weird deal, but it's important because you don't want to be greenwashing, so you want to be sure that what you claim has some backing. So this slide is kind of busy. It shows all of your buildings and how many greenhouse gas emissions there were for each building. And then the orange bar is electricity-related emissions, and the yellow bar is natural gas-related emissions. What we wanted to do is take an example, rather than go through every single building, but take one building as an example and see, okay, what impact did the Facility Master Plan 1 project have on one example building? So we picked Northwest Junior High. So in 2019, Northwest Junior High was number 3 on your list. It was your third highest emission building, and half the emissions were coming from natural gas. Well, the Facility Master Plan project number 1, we had converted that to geothermal heating, and so that is one that will have a big difference. So in 2021, it was in operation with its electric-based geothermal heating system with an 86% reduction in emissions in that one building. And that's because of 2 things. A, you converted from natural gas heat to electric, and B, Mid-American had this huge reduction in their emissions. So you converted to electric, and the electricity that you were able to buy for that building had way less emissions associated with it. So that's how you got the 86% reduction in emissions on that one. Good news is it's going to still keep going down because Mid-American is going to 100% electricity for their buildings. So Northwest Junior High in approximately 2025 is going to be a zero emission building. And you're already set up for that because it's all electric. And so you're able to take advantage of those advancements by the utility by virtue of having it be an all electric building. So another way to kind of compare and benchmark how the Iowa City district is doing with greenhouse gas emissions is to look at some national data. Unfortunately, the data available in greenhouse gas emissions is really pretty poor. It's not very dialed in to individual utilities. You know, we were just talking about how different the different utilities' emissions rates are. You really can't get good data on actual emissions from individual buildings. So we take a pretty high-level view. You look at all of the buildings in the U.S. and you take all of the energy that they use and all of the emissions associated with all of that, and you divide it by the number of square feet, and you can kind of get a metric that you can say, okay, you can compare against that. And so that's what's on the first bar there, is the average greenhouse gas emissions for per square foot for the commercial buildings. And so it's almost 16 pounds per square foot per year. Another study, one study that we did find was a study that studied a reasonable number of LEED certified buildings to see what is the emissions intensity for LEED buildings, and that's a little over 8 for LEED Platinum. So the best LEED buildings nationally average out around 8. The Iowa City School District in 2021 averaged less than that, 6. So better than LEED Platinum for your district as a whole. That's a pretty incredible result. And then if you look at one of your best buildings, Alexander Elementary, in 2021 was under 2 because it's an all-electric building. So again, this is definitely the good news part of the of the presentation, and it's fantastic news. I don't think there's many districts, if any, that can probably compare with this. Jeff told me so give me the data. We looked, but it's not available, at least not where we can find it. So that's the end of looking back at where we were. So now I'm going to look forward from now till 2030, and decided to focus on 2030 because that's really the time frame where I think you have some certainty, and your projects that you have planned are going to be within that time frame. So wanted to focus on that more specifically. So the grayed out part is the part that's already done, and the part on the right that isn't grayed out is the part that's yet to come. So the first couple of lines on transportation, in this projection, we're showing them as unchanged. That doesn't mean that they need to be unchanged. It just means that what this projection is what I call the current path. So it's taking your current plans, specific plans that you have, and saying, okay, if you just do exactly what you have planned and nothing else, this is what it would look like. So a lot going on with electric vehicles these days. There's more and more becoming available. You can't get a pickup truck yet, even though they're starting to make them. You can't get them because they're backed up. But by 2030, electric buses and other trucks and other vehicles will be more available. So I think it's reasonable that you can think about that, and probably is something that you should have on your radar. In particular, when you negotiate your next busing agreement, it might be something you want to think about including in those discussions.
I got an off-the-wall question for you.
Yes.
'Cause I know you love them, Dwight.
Yeah.
Natural gas vehicles, are they more efficient use of natural gas than heating and cooling a building?
No. Well, it depends how you define efficient. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, it's the same. Same amount of greenhouse gas emissions, whether you're doing it in a vehicle or burning it in a building.
Because I've been to cities where they, claim their buses are clean because they're running on natural gas.
Yeah, so we actually did a study for another school district and compared, they have a lot of propane buses, and so did some study to see, what are the propane emissions associated with diesel. So propane has a lot less particulate emissions, so definitely cleaner air. But if you're talking about greenhouse gases, it's really not very different than diesel.
Okay.
Per mile, it's about the same. Yeah.
Jeff, which buildings are on the Lynn County REC?
Wickham, Van Allen, North Central, and Grant.
Is Penn?
No.
Penn and Hills are aligned.
Yeah.
What was the second
Uh,
Penn and
Wickham, or Penn and Hills. Hills are aligned.
What's Liberty?
Liberty is Mid-America
We
because,
put it on the right side of the property. Left side of the property was Lynn County. When we designed it, we specifically put it in Mid-American.
and Grant we could.
Yeah.
We had that
That's
discussion.
right.
We did that on purpose.
Yeah, it's huge, especially for a building that size.
Yeah. Well, you were part of that discussion.
Yeah.
But we moved it over there just so we could put it in Mid-American. The line goes right through the lot.
So, this is probably getting ahead of you, sorry Dwight, but is there any lever for them to change? Lynn County REC, what's their,
Yeah, you know,
like, why is Mid-American doing this? Why should
Right.
Lynn County REC do this next? Because you can tell easily, right, that's where our
Right.
increase is.
If you don't mind, can we
Yep,
defer that?
I keep getting ahead of you, sorry.
Yep.
Okay.
That's your job, man.
We'll get there. And I can move a little faster. So, the
Just
natural
want the
gas.
answer.
Natural gas projections are between now and 2030, based on your current plans. There'll be a reduction in natural gas because of plans to convert, Weber and Wickham to geothermal and Horn as well. And those are all three projects that are underway. And so that will help keep your natural gas usage going down.
Well, converting the kitchen equipment in the buildings, is that a substantial part of that? Effort?
I don't know if it's really substantial, but it is something we're doing.
Yeah.
You know,
And it's included in this estimate, but it's way less than what than heating. The building, so the other element is domestic hot water, or service hot water. So converting those to electric, also from natural gas to electric, will also help. But if you look at your total natural gas bill, it's probably 90 to 95% heating. If it's a gas heated building, and 5 to 10% is the kitchen and the hot water. But I know that you guys have been electrifying your kitchens and your domestic water heaters, and that's
Yes,
a great-
Southeast is electric kitchen, renovating now at Northwest, North Central, any new equipment is electric. Anything we're gonna, if we're gonna keep an old piece of gas, we're gonna keep it, but otherwise everything new. Rooftop units, a lot of rooftop units have makeup air, you're sucking in fresh air. If it's zero, you have to temper that air. Traditionally, they've been gas, so as we replace them, we'll be going to electric. That's not a real quick thing.
And we've been taking boilers out of the district too. We took them out at West High, Northwest. City High is gonna be eventually, so there are a lot of boilers going away.
So all of that conversion still makes sense.
Definitely.
Right, in terms of cost
Oh,
and
yeah.
reduction of.
Yeah.
So in terms of projecting out the electric emissions associated with your electric use, need to look at what those utilities have planned for their emissions profile. And this is based on what they've publicly stated. So, they've made public statements and or commitments about what they're going to do. So Mid-American and Alliant have publicly stated goals to be net zero for all their electricity generation by 2050. Mid-American doesn't have a specific year on when they want to get to 100% for zero carbon electricity in Iowa, but based on the trajectory of where they are and what their plans are, we've got it plugged in here as 2025 as our best guess for when they'll get to zero. Lynn County doesn't have any stated goals, and so the Lynn County's rationale is they sell the renewable electricity to outside parties in order to try to keep the rates down for their members. It's a co-op, it's a member-driven company. That's what their membership wants. So that's what they get. So they're, from a financial standpoint, coming out ahead because they're selling the renewable electricity for more than they're buying the non-renewable electricity. And so it results in lower rates for their membership. That's their rationale. And they don't have any, they have specific plans to increase their solar and wind generation capacity, but they don't have specific plans to retain those renewable credits. They don't have plans to change how they're selling that electricity.
So if we had a 20-acre site in the Lynn County area and put a solar farm on it, would that help?
Yeah, so it would, it can also take the approach of putting solar on individual buildings.
I'd rather not do that. I'd rather just have a solar farm
Yep.
myself. But
Yep. Yeah, so we can think of them equivalent in terms of how they affect the greenhouse gas emissions. The economics and maintenance and all of that might be different, but for now, I'd say let's just think about them as you could. So that's one option for Lynn County REC, and we can kind of jump ahead to that. Well, let's just go through this real quick. Lynn County REC is projected, the emissions are projected to increase. That's not because they're going to have more emissions associated with their electricity. It's because 2 of your new elementaries that you have planned are in Lynn County REC territory. And so you're going to increase the square footage of buildings that you have in Lynn County REC territory, and so the emissions will go up in direct proportion to that.
So, Kevin, understand this. So Lynn County REC's total generation scheme is will actually continue to produce as much greenhouse gas emissions over the next 20 years or so as they are now?
I don't know that.
There's no way to answer that.
There really isn't, I don't think. My personal opinion is the farther you go out, the less likely that is to be true. It will come down, I think, eventually. And it might be sooner rather than later because it's really kind of a policy choice on their part. It's not, from a technology standpoint, they're putting in more generation. It's just that they're not selling that to their customers. They're selling it to other people, and then they're buying power just off of the grid.
But the generation they're putting in
is solar and wind.
So it's less.
So the other thing to keep in mind is they just haven't publicly announced what their plan is, correct? Whereas the other 2 energy companies say, this is what our plan is, this is when we project to get there, here's what we're doing.
So
REC is
In Lynn
not.
County, they have publicly announced their plans for installing renewable generation, but they haven't publicly announced who they're planning to sell it to.
So what's their
trying to
reason
figure
for
out-
wanting to?
I'm
Sorry, Charlie.
Go ahead.
I just mean, what's their incentive to want to do it? Is there a rebate for them? Like, why Mid-American and Alliant, or is it just public pressure, political will? You said they're making money off the way they're currently doing it. So
Yeah.
what would be their incentive to want to change that?
I think they're, like I said, they're a co-op, and I'm not really, I don't want to present myself as an expert on utility regulation and or the utility industry, but my understanding is that they're a member-driven organization, and so if their membership says, hey, we want you to sell us renewable electricity. Now, just as a spoiler, you can purchase renewable energy credits through Lynn County REC, and the price is reasonable, and so that's really a good option for you guys. So in other words, you can say, okay, I know you're selling renewable electricity to someone, sell it to me, because I want it, and I'm willing to pay for it. And the price is actually not that unreasonable. So that is, I think, a good option for you. That's something that is in your control. You can't, unfortunately, you can't control who your electricity provider is, other than by changing where you put your buildings, and it makes sense for you to put your schools where they need to be to serve your students. So you don't really have much, except like at Liberty, where we're right on the line. You usually don't have the ability to make a choice there, but you can make a choice about how you procure that electricity from the provider that you have to use. So Alliant is a smaller portion of your buildings. It actually is projected to decrease, even though you are adding one of your new elementaries is in the Alliant territory. Their reduction in emissions for electricity more than offsets the additional use for that. And then, of course, Mid-American, it goes to zero. One of the buildings is in Mid-American territory. It doesn't show up on the greenhouse gas projection because it will be zero. So if we benchmark your buildings, your individual buildings, this is that same benchmark we talked about before, but we're splitting out the Iowa City School District buildings between your three utility providers. And so it's unsurprising in some ways, but dramatic how per square foot your Lynn County buildings have over 18 pounds of CO2 per square foot per year. In your Mid-American buildings, this is in 2030 are 2, and the reason they're not 0 is because some of those Mid-American buildings do still have gas usage. So this is for the total building, electricity plus gas usage, and what is that? So we're getting there, so we don't need to spend a lot more time on this, but Lynn County REC buildings will be in 2030 by far your biggest single source of emissions. So all of this is leading up to what you guys wanted to talk about a long time ago. So what can we do about it? Which is install district-owned renewable electricity generation. So that could either be, like Dwayne says, you can put it all in the field, or you spread it out among the buildings. So that's one option. Another option is to purchase the renewable energy certificates, and so which is basically to purchase the carbon-free electricity through Lynn County. So just as an example, one thing we did was we looked at, okay, let's take one building that's in the Lynn County area, and let's look at putting solar on that. And there's different levels that we could put in there. So we could put in enough solar. If we basically fill the whole roof, I don't have all the slides here to bore you with that, but we did test it out. You could put enough solar on the roof of Grant to make it a net zero building, so that you're generating as much electricity as that building uses over the course of a year. Now, the way it works out is, because of the number of hours of sun in the summer, you generate a lot more electricity in the summer. Summer is actually when you use the least, so you end up exporting a lot of electricity in the summer. In the winter, you use the most because you're using electricity for heat. That's when you have the least hours of sunlight, so you produce the least in the winter. You can be net zero over the course of the year, which is a legitimate thing, but the rate structure for this size building in this territory is not favorable for doing that. So because what happens is in the summertime when you're producing more than you're using and you're exporting to the grid, they buy that back at wholesale price. In the winter when you're using more and you're importing from the grid, you buy that at retail price. So you're putting a lot of generation, selling a lot of it at wholesale, buying a lot at retail, and financially that is just not going to pay back within the life of that. That investment is not going to pay back even over the whole life of the system. That really is going to be true with the central option as well. Maybe probably equivalently true.
My only reason for saying that is the maintenance that's required in the roofing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So you can definitely do it. It's going to cost quite a bit of money to go that way. So another option, and what we're showing here, is what we're calling the best payback option. So given the rate structure that you're on, and this particular building's energy use profile, what's the best payback for solar? And really what that is to put in enough generation to cover your summer load, and just that. And that ends up being roughly about 50% over the course of the year. You generate 50% of the electricity that you use. That avoids that negative financial situation of selling at wholesale and buying at retail. So that's what this shows. The study for Grant. Capital cost to put that in is going to be a little north of $400,000. Annual savings are a little over $20,000. It's about a 20-year payback. It's still a pretty long payback. So that's one option. Another option is to purchase renewable energy certificates. And so Lynn County has a program available where you can purchase that electricity at 0.4 cents per kilowatt hour. So as a frame of reference, and I think there's a slide here coming up, maybe it's on the next one, yeah. So this shows your blended rate of dollars per kilowatt hour or cents per kilowatt hour for each of your utilities. And you can see Mid-American, interestingly, the cleanest electricity is the cheapest. That's, I don't know, someone who knows more about the utility industry can maybe explain how that happened. But Lynn County has sort of, the rate is kind of in the middle, and the renewable credits, when you add that on top, you can still purchase carbon-free electricity from Lynn County for less than you can purchase just regular Alliant power, which is partially renewable but not all renewable. Alliant also has a similar program. It's a little bit more expensive. You can also purchase carbon-free electricity from Alliant, and so that's where it's almost 16 cents per kilowatt hour. Lynn County is just under 10 cents per kilowatt hour for carbon-free. So if you look at the top of these graphs, this is all carbon-free electricity, what it would cost you to buy carbon-free electricity from the 3 different providers.
Can we just run feeder wires from here?
Right, yeah.
Somehow I knew he was gonna bring that up.
The utility board might have a problem with that. I mean, the good news to me on this graph is that's actually a pretty reasonable price. You know what Lynn County is offering. So
It's a price, but it can I sit here and tell Jeff Biggers, who's one of the major players in the local climate action group,
yeah.
that this way of buying electricity actually results in less carbon atoms in the air?
Depending where you're
It's
at.
less carbon that is attributable to your use of electricity.
And here's what I wonder though, I mean, as more people like us, the ICCSD, want to buy renewable energy, is that what makes Lynn County RC shift more, right? If we start buying credits and Cedar Rapids Schools buys credits and blah, 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 and then all of a sudden they have so much demand and they don't have enough supply, so they have to start investing more in renewable energy. And that, I mean, to go back to like, how do we push it? That's what pushes them, is the marketplace. And so, no, I mean, it makes us more carbon neutral. It doesn't make the world more carbon neutral, but maybe it pushes them in the direction of making the world more carbon neutral.
And that's a reasonable thing to say, probably from the board table. I'm not quite so sure it's convincing.
You know, it doesn't have to be all one or all the other. So you could put in some solar, the amount that makes financial sense to put in for your own generation, and then purchase the rest off the grid.
So there is an amount, there is a solar capacity that does make financial sense.
Yeah, I think that, you know, that roughly 50%, that example for Grant was, I think, you know, it's a long payback. 20 years is a pretty long payback, but the life of solar panels are warranted for 25 years. Expected life is going to be typically longer than the warranty period. So, you know, it'll pay back within the life of the equipment, and you'll come out in the end money ahead. So that, to me, that makes financial sense. It's, you know, a lot of times when we're looking at paybacks for different energy efficiency strategies, where our only goal is just strictly financial and not environmental. You know, I don't know what you guys look for on a payback, but you know, something in the 5 to 10 year range is common. So 20 is a lot higher than that. You know, I guess my own, you know, understanding you have limited financial resources, but for what it's worth, my 2 cents is, put your money into eliminating your scope 1 fossil fuel use. And, and rather than putting a whole lot of money into solar generation, stop directly putting CO2 in the air. Take that money and stop doing that. And then buy the carbon-free electricity, which will have an impact on the marketplace. But you don't have unlimited funds. If you did, you could put in solar for everything and produce all your natural gas. But anyway, I shouldn't be advocating. I'm just giving them information.
It's helpful.
Yeah.
Well, that's what makes sense, because I think there are people who don't see the financial picture, who just think we should not, that it's our job not just to educate students, but also to solve the climate crisis. And we don't have the funds to put in endless amounts of solar generation. We could build our own nuclear power plant if we had endless funds. But since we don't, and our job is to build schools to educate kids, as we're doing that, I think we have to find that happy medium, where we're being responsible, while at the same time doing what our core mission is, which is to educate students in our city and communities.
It's scary to me to spend all that money on solar when the payback is 21 years. And I feel like the tech it's not a 21-year payback, because the tech is going to advance before we reach the payback, and then we're just going to have to reinvest money and redo it. That's what's scary for me. If the payback was 5 years, then it's more comfortable, because you're like, well, there probably won't be rapid, changes. But 21 years, I just think a lot's going to be different, and I mean, it better be in how we consume energy as a society in 21 years.
So another thought for you, JP, is that for years now, we've been using infrastructure money to leverage, we've been leveraging it to lower the utility costs, which comes out of the general fund. So we can make the argument that you need the funds to employ your teachers and teach your students by reducing our energy costs if there's a way to leverage the infrastructure money.
I was just hoping the payback would be more.
Well, I think there might be, but I've already got it. I'm just trying to shut up.
No, there are some options that I think that are viable for bringing that down. There may be grant money available, so that would be one way. Another way is there are tax credits that you can't take advantage of directly, but if you partner with a private entity, you can capture some of those tax credits that would buy that payback down some.
Mid-America usually offers rebates more than what the other power company.
I know that they rebate
They're just starting to get into talking about solar.
Are they?
They're
Okay.
just starting to. So
Okay.
We're not doing it on our buildings yet. We can't do it on the buildings like the white group stuff.
Yeah,
We can't do it there yet.
right. Yeah.
So, Lisa, going back to your point again, so does it seem to you that purchasing renewable credits makes more sense than buying solar panels because the panels will not be there?
I mean, I think it's the safer fiscal move, at least in the short term, because I think it gives us more flexibility to change and adapt, because that would be each year we decide, right? So that's just a one-year commitment each year that we do it. And then if something develops or changes or whatever, then we can pivot. But like solar panels, to me, then we're there for 21 years. Or we eat a huge lump sum.
I only want to do something that saves us money and gives us money to spend on other things, because it seems to me that if the portfolio of these different companies isn't necessarily affected by us buying those credits, which it might be, it might not be, then we just raise the price to handle the market. We don't know. I don't want to do anything because it looks good. I just want to do it if it saves us money. We're not in a place where we're saving the environment right now. Isn't that a terrible thing to say? Right now, with the budget we have,
No, but if it made sense, if it made sense of taking
Yep.
money out of Pebble, that was going to save us a ton of money in the general fund,
Yep.
and that we could, pay more teachers,
Yep.
then it would make sense. And the
You can
numbers
also-
that
you could
you're
also-
showing us, it doesn't make sense to do that.
We made a lot of improvements in the past by taking out Pebble notes. So you don't have to fund it all up front. You actually commit a certain part of your Pebble every year, reduce the cost of the note to make the improvement now. Does that make sense? It's like taking out a loan on a house. you're buying the whole house, but you only pay for it on an annual basis. It helps you keep your costs down.
I guess it's just the percentage that you get back. I brought this idea up to Matt months ago because we are Lynn County Rec customers, and we got solar a couple of years ago, and we pay nothing for our electricity right now. So, and we will have paid for our solar within 6-7 years, not 20.
Yeah, so let me address,
Yeah,
address that. And I have solar in my house too, and it's paid back, and it's great. And actually, our business is a net zero. We're a net zero energy building for our business too. The difference between my house, your house, our business is we're on a rate structure that is based on total kilowatt hours, and really just that. It's like how much electricity do you use? Larger buildings like your schools, they're on a demand billing, so what you pay is based on how much energy you use, but also what is your peak rate of usage. And really the reason that comes into it for large buildings is that determines how big a power plant they have to have, is because they have to meet that maximum rate of usage. And so they have a surcharge for large buildings. When you have a big peak, you're going to pay for that peak. It doesn't matter how long you stayed up there. You were up there for 15 minutes. They had to be able to have the generating capacity to do that, so they're charging you for it, even though you didn't use much electricity. It was just there for a little bit. So solar is much harder financial proposition when you're on a demand billing. If you're small enough that you're not on a demand billing, then you can get a good payback. It's once you switch to that demand billing that the payback starts to get really low.
Plus the difference.
Because although a lot of times your generation will match the time of your peak usage, and so your peak usage will come down, not always. It's that one time.
And Dwight, it's private versus public. We don't get the tax credits that you get on the.
Plus there's the tax credits, yes. Right, and so like my house, my business, probably your house, you were able to take advantage of the tax credits. And so that's a big element of it too, right? Yep.
So, this has been really, really fascinating, I think, and I'm glad everyone has been here, but I think that we're gonna have to cut it short now and maybe plan on revisiting it again in a couple months to decide, how we want to move forward. But I don't want to shortchange our other discussion, which are setting the agenda topics for next year, because we did that last month. And I want to give us all a break before we switch to the 6 o'clock meeting. So, Chase, I have what you sent me, but I don't know if you want to talk about the agenda topics for the rest of the year.
Sure. So Matt and I were just sidebarring a little bit. We don't have it set for the rest of the year, but we proposed for the next 3 meetings that for December that we look at a budget workshop for the Ops Committee. We coordinated the entire board to come to Ops that night for the budget workshop. And then in January, we would have an update on FNP 2.0, followed by then staffing and grow your own, the support staff teacher pipeline. We have the education committee to look at the student piece. So we do staffing, grow your own support staff and teacher pipeline in February. And that aligns nicely with our staffing calendar. And so we would look at budget workshop for December, FNP 2.0 for January, and February staffing.
Thanks.
And just so you guys have a heads up, so when we do agenda setting tonight, I'll probably prompt that we do a work session after the 29th. That'll really be more what is the status of the budget now, and then the committee meeting that Chase is talking about, where we would invite all of you to participate, would be maybe more strategy based, right? Like, okay, now what do we do about it? So when that comes up, that's how that jives with what we're thinking here for December.
And if you just put that in there, updates you give us, so that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yep, you'll see it in there.
Great.
Yep.
So when do we have to make some decision about what we're talking about tonight?
Jeff, Chase, what is the timeline for making decisions about our climate action plan?
Well, so the only guidance really that we got from the board back when we started this was about reducing our carbon footprint, and those 2 benchmarks being 2030 and then 2050. And as you showed the data, we're on pace with that, Charlie. So I think that's to Lisa's point. You didn't make this point. Sorry, but Lisa's
No, I
comment. We would
wanted
have to
you
come
to
back.
take the,
I think we'd probably have to come back to the board and probably
Yeah.
share some of the same information, you know, and then talk about if there's something different we'd want to do.
So to be clear, there are other things that are still kind of rolling out that we don't need any sort of initiative to keep doing. So like even as we replace mowers and blowers for blowing leaves and stuff, those are all being converted to electricity. So there are aspects of this that will continue to go regardless.
And all of our designs, and right now, you know, we're not starting a school in Lynn County for a couple years, even the design. So everything we're doing now with the middle schools, we've already, you know, we've gone electric as much as we can. We're, you know, not putting gas in. So we're following what, you know, the path we should be taking. So I don't think there's any action has to be taken now for us.
And I think we can continue to fold it in every time we talk about FMP 2.0, at least part of it. And, you know, when we have a conversation about is it time to pick starting a school, where's the school going to go and what's the carbon footprint of that school going?
With that all said, what we've accomplished to this point is really the easiest stuff. The stuff going forward is that diesel, the other fuel, the gas at Wayne County REC. So it's not something that you necessarily would have put off for years by any means. So because it is the hard part. So.
We're just gonna need to reduce some of this to writing so that
Sure.
we can track this instead of starting again the next time. So let's just make sure what you're saying is exactly what we need to know. So, great.
Information, I just wondered about next time, you know, where are electric buses? Who's doing it, how much do they cost, where's that technology at? Because that's the other piece where we're gonna make a big shift. And I just wanna know what exists in the world.
We can bring that up. And I know we have to go.
Yeah, we do. Our next ops meeting is December 13th. That'll be the budget. Full board invited. Please put it on your calendar. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.